Hello, and welcome to Standing Strong for Marriages. Thanks for stopping by.
It's great to see you. Today we're going to be looking at a critique of David Pawson. David Pawson is in the comment section as far as I'm concerned. He's been a huge help in helping Christians decide some of the what should we do in the aftermath of a divorce? What if we're in an unhappy or dysfunctional marriage? Should we jump out? And then, of course, should we be able to go get a new spouse? Well, we talk about these things a lot, and the critique we're going to be looking at is from Leslie McFall, who, wow. When I say that I'm not an expert in these things, I think you'll see what I'm saying when you look at the just volume of paragraphs that some of these people have written. You know, I'm not professional ministry theologian worker, so I'm more like I assume my audience is just regular people attending church or having heard a whole mixture, variety of things. So one of the things this article is going to bring up is this new term that we might want to know, which is called absolutist. So absolutist means essentially it would say that divorce for any and all reasons is prohibited. So if you haven't heard of that term before, now you've had it. One of the comparison contrast things that we're going to get out of this article is that McFall and Pawson agree that remarriages after divorce are not allowed. So both of them agree on that. Doesn't matter, for either of them if there was adultery or not, or some kind of pre-marriage fornication or not. No remarriage. Yeah. So go live a single life, serve the Lord, undivided, as Paul talks about. So they agree on that. But what they don't agree upon is the bit with the what about divorce? When could divorce be possibly allowed? Pawson would say there are some situations where if there is some sort of fornication, we'll look at what he means by that, it would be okay to enact a divorce for a Christian person to do that. And he doesn't think that causes any problems with some issues of like unforgiveness or what's the beatitude? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Right? None of that is a problem for David. But for McFall, it is a problem. So McFall would say he's an absolutist. He would say this is a lifelong, until death parts of a couple, marriage is for life, and also the divorce is wrong. So let's just look at the end, the conclusions, and then if you would like to read the whole paper for yourself, I'll leave it in the show notes. All right. Okay, so this is where you can find a lot of Leslie McFall, wisereaction.org, marriage-divorce-remarriage /Dr-Leslie-McFall, McFall. So you can see that there on the screen. I went and there was a whole bunch of unpublished articles, and one that caught my eye was this critique of David Pawson's book, Remarriage is Adultery, Unless. This was done in 2011. David Pawson, Remarriage is Adultery Unless, What the Bible Says About Divorce and Its Outcomes. And so this looks like Pawson wrote this in 2011. So my English training told me read the first and the last paragraphs, and that'll give you a good idea of what's in the middle. So it starts, the author rightly sensed that Jesus was an absolutist when it came to the breakup of lawfully conducted marriages. Fully convinced of this truth, he set about to find a way of establishing his conviction from the New International Version, the NIV. So we're going to learn that might not be something you want to read based on this. Unfortunately, this version does not present Jesus as an absolutist because Erasmus, this is Desiderius Erasmus, translator. Erasmus published both the Latin and Greek New Testaments in 1516. 1 year later, Martin Luther posted 95 Theses in, I think, Germany, Wittenberg, Germany, 1517. And a lot of reformers picked up his work and ran with it. In fact, that is highlighted here in this book, Divorce and Remarriage, by Joseph Webb and his wife, Patricia Webb. So this is another book that you might be interested in. You can see midway, but I'm on my second reading. So good stuff, not always easy, but It's important to know. This is somebody whose name is going to come up a lot if you're interested in this stuff. So let's just reread that sentence. Unfortunately, this version, referring to the NIV, does not present Jesus as an absolutist because Erasmus, the translator, who is a humanist, convinced that Jesus was not an absolutist, set about to establish his private conviction by choosing from the margin of a single, very late copy of the Greek New Testament words, which would establish his theology of what Jesus really taught. Erasmus led Europe astray through a single alteration to Jesus' words when he incorporated into God's word the small Greek words, I would say EI. I should also remember this, but as you can see here, these are Greek before this phrase. I always say UN. I know I'm so sorry for people that actually know Greek, which is found in the Matthew 19:9 passage. Okay, passage about divorce and remarriage and adultery. Okay, the addition of this small word had Jesus saying the opposite to what he taught and what the universal church taught right up to the Reformation. So going back to this book here, this Dr. Joseph Webb book, Divorce and Remarriage. What's the subtitle? The Trojan Horse Within the Church. Whom Shall We Believe? He spends a lot of time laying out what the early church fathers believed. And okay, so let's skip to the end because this is like multiple pages and not so easy. I would say that Leslie McFall is very well studied, super expert. I'm not, but I'm just trying to get the big parts. So we'll go to the conclusion. McFall writes, despite David Pawson's desire to label Jesus as an absolutist in practice, this is not watertight, for he concedes that even after he has restricted the word fornication to be defined as premarital sex, he believes that Jesus has made allowance for divorce for unfaithfulness, and a Christian must cooperate in giving their unbelieving partner a divorce certificate if they demand it. It is one thing to state that Jesus' exception will be rarely used outside Jewish circles because the Jews are extremely careful to ensure that their daughters are virgins on the wedding night, but if you allow divorce on any grounds, then Jesus is no longer an absolutist. Next paragraph. Logically, if God knows that young men and women are promiscuous in the West to focus on just one culture before they marry, then all of these first marriages are defiled relationships. So potentially, they can all divorce each other at a time they choose to bring up their past promiscuous deeds or their partner's past promiscuous deeds. I think that's like actually pretty interesting. David Pawson does really kind of frame this in the Jewish betrothal camp, though. So I'm meaning that David does say, hey, Matthew is different than Mark and Luke in its treatment of divorce, remarriage, and this adultery stuff. And he talks about how it was particular to Jews. Matthew's gospel was written to a Jewish audience. And that this fornication is about the betrothal, the essentially Jewish engagement period, and that if there is a sleeping around done during the engagement period, the betrothal period, then this is why we find that Matthew is saying, yeah, go ahead and, if you want to, break off the engagement. I think that's what David says in his sermons, but this article is relating to David's book. So did David change his views? Well, I don't know. Let's hold on. All right, so here we go. So we'll go to this. This was listed David Pawson Official, Divorce and Remarriage 10 years ago. So today is 2025.
Even if it's taken place.
And this is the part I want to listen to. So let's just pick up at 6.5. Basically, he's been talking about the situation with how Joseph dealt with Mary's, supposed sleeping around and
community. Well, now that's the background to Matthew. And Matthew is highlighting the situation of someone who has sex before marriage. And I believe fornication is sex before marriage, and adultery is sex after marriage. And I've got a book at home, which I've mentioned in my little book on divorce, which you ought to get if you're considering what fornication means, whereby an American scholar has, to me, proved beyond doubt that fornication is limited to unmarried sex. And adultery means sex of the married with someone else other than their own partner. So I'm absolutely convinced that the other two explanations for the exception are not really true to Scripture, and that fornication is the one exception. And Jesus is saying, if you discover before or at the time of your marriage that your partner is not a virgin, that you're not the first they've had, that you are justified in calling the marriage off, even if it's taken place. But that is so rare an occurrence, largely because it is now widely accepted that a married couple have had sex with each other before they're married, or sex with others before they're married. Fornication is so common now. I always ask a married couple I'm going to marry now, have either of you had sex, either with each other or with someone else? Then you better confess it now, and let's get it dealt with before you're married.
Okay, wow. So let me just say, wow, that is pretty interesting, right? I mean, you heard David say that if both people aren't virgins, then essentially the marriage could always be called off. I mean, whoa. So that's what McFall is talking about when he picks up here. Logically, if God knows that young men and young women are promiscuous in the West, just to focus on one culture, before they marry, then all of these marriages are defiled relationships. So potentially, they can all divorce each other at a time they choose to bring up their past promiscuous deeds or their partner's past promiscuous deeds. So, I mean, it's really actually pretty wacky if you could think about, you know, a person would want to get out of a relationship and would basically out themselves and say, you know, that they were fooling around and their prior, you know, I mean, literally, well, I had someone, just skip that. All right. Then another loophole created by David Pawson in Jesus' absolutist position is the right of the unbeliever to get a divorce from their Christian spouse based on 1 Corinthians 7:15. Okay, first of all, you should know that Leslie McFall does not believe in any divorces for any reason. So this sentence should be understood as describing how David sees things, David Pawson sees things. It is not a reflection of Leslie McFall's views, okay? But the argument would be, well, if the unbeliever has the right to get a divorce from their Christian spouse, then what? It says, if the unbeliever does get a divorce, it has to be assumed that the bond has been dissolved and the unbeliever is free to remarry. Again, he's critiquing David's views. This is essentially how the unbeliever would see it because this was the universal custom in those times. So everything hinges on David Pawson's definition of quote-unquote fornication. And I think this is really true. This is the $1 million phrase that depending upon how you define this term, it takes you in different places. So I know a lot of people are big fans of David Pawson. I guess let's just finish reading. And since the narrow definition has been formulated with the express purpose of ruling out fornication in its normal usage, the teaching is built on it collapses with it. It is not sufficient to argue that one is right for the wrong reason. If the reason is wrong and contrived, and the words are put in Jesus' mouth which are false, this will undermine the teacher's credibility to extract the true teaching of Jesus in other areas of his teaching. It is a dangerous argument to use, be it in politics or finance, religion, in the courts, or on the sports field. The teaching of Jesus on divorce and remarriage cannot be obtained through Erasmus's Greek New Testament, and so not through the NIV, New International Version, or the KJV, King James Version. It can only be obtained through a faithful translation of the universal text, also known as the Byzantine or majority text, two independent editions of which have been published since 1982. So that's generally his conclusion. And like I said, if you'd like to check out the whole WordPress article, you can either probably Google it, is easy, or if you prefer using the link in the show notes, you can do that as well. Here we have the full title, which is the critique of David Pawson's book, Remarriage is Adultery, Unless, by Leslie McFall, 12 September 2011. Thanks you guys so much. I'm really actually excited. I love it when people start to dig into these things because I really feel like a revolution, or a revival. That's the better word. I don't know. Maybe you could use those interchangeably in this sense, but I really think that there is so much fruit to come from this, protecting people. There really seems to be something wacky that went on with this Erasmus character, and it is really a big deal. If it takes us a while to sort out the differences between these two theologians, that's fine. But one thing that I love is they at least help us get going in the right direction, right? Which is establishing this issue about remarriage. And so, like I said in the beginning, they both would agree that for legitimate marriages, meaning, they're not going to say that trying to marry an animal is allowable. Same-sex marriage, that's going to be off the table. Marriage to incestuous marriages, not allowed. I'm sure there's others, but you get the idea. They're talking about legitimate biblical marriages, one man, one woman. And so polygamy would be another thing that we're not talking about here. They would say that these are for life. And David's, unless, as far as I understand David, is that unless there is some sort of fornication done during the engagement period, then you can, quote unquote, divorce that person, break that engagement off. Obviously, David says himself that this is a huge problem in his counseling. David's in a pickle, I would say, because I think Leslie McFall does kind of call him out and say, okay, David, if that's how you think this works, then this whole slew of marriages, we can throw a flag and say, hey, this is not a real binding agreement here, that we don't have to stick to our guns on this. I did go back and read the article a second time from Leslie McFall, and what you really need to, if you go back and read it, double check this, but this is what it says. He basically says that David Pawson has a difficult time, like many people who use the NIV Greek translation. Leslie is going to say anybody in Protestantism that is using defective Erasmus-based Greek or Latin translations, bad, garbage in, garbage out, bad input, bad output. That's essentially what he's saying. So that's where he believes that David gets himself in a pickle, is that he's depending upon bad translations, and that he also uses, in McFall's opinion, a bad definition of fornication. McFall goes to, in this article and other places, outline for us how this fornication term is used for married people all over the place in the Old Testament. So he thinks that it's an unnecessarily restrictive definition, and so he doesn't like that. David takes that fornication term, defines it as sex for unmarried people, and then basically says that, non-virgins marrying is really not kosher, not fine, not strong. So, he uses that. I always thought he only used it for just the Jewish people, and he didn't carry it over to the Gentiles. But apparently in his book, he's also, and in this video that we saw, he's also applying it to Gentiles, which is really weird. I never really had him in my mind as speaking like that. You could see the problems. So McFall says something different. He says, if we go away from this definition of fornication that David uses, and we relook at Matthew 5 and Matthew 19, we'll see that they say different things. Read the article. He says, here's what we should take away from the Matthew 5:32 passage. Basically, the exception or whatever, that clause basically is saying, look, husbands, if you divorce your wives, you're guilty of their sin afterwards. If you kick her out of your house and you write her some legal document and say, essentially, go sleep with other dudes, and she goes and sleeps with other dudes, then brother, that's on you. That's what McFall is arguing. In that context, what he takes the exception, the not for fornication phrase, to mean is not for fornication that she does during the marriage. So, in plain language, if she's sleeping around on you during the marriage, that's on her. That's not on you. That's not on the guy. That's not on the innocent party, if you want to switch the genders around here. But sticking with the way it's written, hey, if she's messing around, husbands, that's not on you. But the minute that you tell her, hey, get out of here, here's your paper, take your bag, hit the road, then you basically given her license to go and sleep with all these other guys, or get back into the dating scene. And McFall says, no, that is your wife, that is your spouse until someone dies. So don't go and tell her to do that. And if you do, then that's the consequence of that is on you. So McFall would say, A, if you're presented with divorce papers, don't sign them. Okay? You don't want to agree to that at all. Period. Nonstop. Just don't do it. Let's look at what he says about the Matthew 19 bit, and then we'll close. So we'll just look at this last bit here. So I just told you what he said the Matthew 5 section says. Here's what he says the Matthew 19 section says. The correct translation of the aorist subjunctive, so I'm not even sure what this term is, in Matthew 19:9 is quote, now I say to you that who, for instance, may have divorced his wife, not that he may have divorced her on account of fornication, and may have married another woman, is being adulterous against his wife. In modern English, we can translate, not that he may have divorced on account of fornication, as not even for fornication, because even is a substitute for the subjunctive verb. If you got lost in that, he gives it to you very straight in this next sentence. Here, Jesus categorically rules out fornication, a broad sexual sin, which includes adultery, a specific sexual sin within the broader circle. Okay? So, if you say rules out fornication, it's going to rule out fornication. It's going to rule out all the different kinds. Adultery, whatever. Porn, whatever. I don't know, whatever. All the things. He categorically rules out all these things as a ground for divorce. Because that's what he always argues. Jesus was an absolutist. No divorcing. Okay. The only quote-unquote cause he mentions is fornication. And he puts a negative in front of it. This explains why the mention of fornication is omitted in Mark, the problem that we've always had, and Luke. We've talked about it many times. In his doctrine of forgiveness, he made no exception for fornication as an unforgivable sin. Okay, so the idea is he put a negative in front of it, meaning the way it should sound in your mind, according to McFall, is whoever divorces his wife, not even if she was a fornicator during the marriage, not even if she was involved in some kind of sexual sin during the marriage, should you divorce her. And if you do, you're basically telling her, go sleep with other people. And if you tell her to do that and she does it, that's on you. That's probably on her too. I don't know. I don't know how McFall would break it down like that, but you are now involved in your spouse's fornication or adultery or sexual sin or whatever you want to call it after a divorce occurs because you initiated it. So the take home from McFall would be, don't initiate divorces, because if you do, you will by consequence put guilt upon yourself, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so that's basically the gist, and like I said, you can check out the whole article. And the big things to take away are absolutists and definitions of fornication and ways to think of how should we read that. Is that an exception to, if you get cheated on, then it's fine to divorce? Or McFall would say, that's the wrong way to understand it. The right way to understand it is not even if someone cheats on you, should you be divorcing them, because that's promoting sin, that they go out and commit sin, when in actuality, you're the only one that they should be having sex with until one of you dies. So, you get it? To make sure that we understand what additional info we're getting from the Matthew 19 section, it's the same basic idea. It just is a little bit different in the sense of, husband, if you are cheated on during your marriage, you don't forgive your wife for that. You give her a divorce document. You basically, in practice, tell her to go sleep with other dudes and that you're not going to sleep with her anymore. And then you go and take a new wife for yourself. Now you're committing adultery against your original, your true spouse. Your true spouse. Basically, if you get the government or some church to sign off on you living with another woman and sleeping with her, then you're in adultery. You're committing a sin against your true wife, the woman that you married originally. Okay, just wrap that up nice and clean. So, you get it? Check it out. Excited for, I think this is great stuff. So I'm just excited for it. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Hey, thanks again for watching, commenting, sharing, subscribing. We have an opportunity, if you'd like to be a financial participant with this ministry, that you're able to do so. God says that his heart for us is to be cheerful givers, and I think a lot of the cheer in giving comes from being really excited about certain causes. So there's a million causes and things going on in the kingdom. I would encourage you to find something that you love and that makes you feel happy that you're giving to it. Sometimes there is the white knuckle just of the being generous as a discipline. I think there's a place in that, but I don't think it's just that. So we have different tiers from $500 to $500 a month, because I really have no idea how much money people are making, but it's just an opportunity to let you know. You can find links in the show notes, and let's get back to it. Thanks again.